Welcome, everyone. We're so honored to be talking to Member of Parliament from Warringah, Zali Steggall, today. And we're thrilled here at Daily Cloud to be welcoming you in the middle of your incredibly busy and urgent and sadly crisis-ridden week. But welcome, Member of Parliament Steggall.
Thank you.
We're really thrilled to have you here. So I'm going to just jump right in. Probably everybody in Australia knows who you are, or most people do, but we're talking to a global audience. We've got about 250,000 followers and up to 5 million Twitter impressions in a good month. So people who are not yet familiar with you, I'm just going to introduce you a bit. You are a barrister. You were for about a decade an Olympic skier, which is also deeply awesome. And now you represent a community that is facing a lot of different challenges, and we're especially thrilled to have you here today because, as most everyone in the world knows who's following global events, Australia sadly is in the middle of an unprecedented bushfire crisis, and you have introduced a really important climate change national framework for adaptation and action bill 2020. So please tell us about it.
Yeah, look, I guess in terms of why I'm here, I'm in an electorate in Warringah where our previous member was Tony Abbott, who was the Prime Minister of Australia and who has been very polarising here, and I think was a key player in why we've had such a divisive debate in Australia on climate change. And it's sort of crazy that it's taken that we are one of the continents and countries most exposed to the impacts, and yet we've had the most dysfunctional policy on it. So that was a really key motivator for me to give up my practice as a barrister. Like I said, I've been a sports person, so I am about sort of big goals and competition. As a lawyer, I was sort of looking at, but also as a mum. I am a mum of teenagers, and I felt really frustrated and anxious that Australia just wasn't going in the right direction. So really wanted to create change. So Warringah came on board. The election last year, we had a sweeping change, and overwhelmingly the electorate wants me to put forward a plan on climate change. This is a traditionally fiscally conservative electorate that has always voted Liberal, but wants to be progressive and wants more action on climate change. So that's very much my role as an independent. I don't know how it is for you, but as an independent here in the Australian Parliament, I don't have affiliation to a party, so I can represent the views of my electorate. That's my absolute responsibility. So the Climate Change Act, what I did was I looked at all the other countries around the world that are progressing on climate change. How come Australia is so divided when other countries have been able to come up with a plan? And so I looked at what do they have in place, and a clear and obvious point to look at for us is the UK. In 2008, they managed to pass a Climate Change Act with bipartisan support. So when I look at the Australian government, a Conservative coalition government, this is current Boris Johnson Tory policy in the UK.
Right.
So this legislation that I'm proposing is sensible framework legislation to enable us to have a plan and a proactive course of the future and stop the party politics and the destructive policy we've had in Australia.
Right. Well, I know that a lot of people who are contacting Daily Clout on social media are going to be really glad that there's any leadership at all on this issue. And I'm not trying to be rude. It's just that, reflecting back, we're nonpartisan. We don't have a dog in the fight. We're not in Australia. But we're hearing thousands and thousands of voices of Australians absolutely traumatized by their experience of couple scores of humans dead, 1 billion animals incinerated, now starving to death, the animals that are, left alive, hundreds of homes destroyed, and it's obvious to people that there needs to be leadership on climate change. People are very distraught. So I guess let's go to the meat of your proposal, because we here have a very nerdy mission, and we actually read the bills. So I just want to be transparent. I'm thrilled that you're offering stepping into this breach at all, because it seems like people are clamoring, and I'm sure you hear that from your constituents and from social media in general. I have not been able to share your actual draft bill yet. I understand it's not quite ready. Is that correct?
No, we're fine-tuning just the legalities of some aspects and wording around some of the clauses, but I will be having it available when Parliament resumes in early February.
Fantastic.
The main aspect, it is though closely following the UK legislation. There's nothing revolutionary. In Australia, our state governments have policies and legislation that have and are committed to net zero by 2050. So what I am doing is putting in place a framework of mitigation that sets our federal government in line with state governments and co-ops. So I'm providing that policy certainty that business is crying out for in Australia.
Right.
But as you are also aware, we're so impacted by drought. In agriculture is really suffering in our regional areas. We need a transition plan when it comes to jobs, because mining has been a big sector for us in the Australian economy, and so it needs to be more than just talking points. It has to be in the framework and the planning. And of course, the bushfires have highlighted that we're actually not safe. This is actually an enemy from within, and that has really raised the issue locally. I think for a lot of people, climate change has been something a little bit abstract. They believe, they accept it, but they kind of haven't prioritised it, maybe in how they've voted, but also their actions. And what this summer has done for Australia has really reminded everybody that this is actually happening now. This is not abstract in the future, but now. We've had, we have the drought, we have the bushfires, but we also have really poor air pollution standards. So our major cities, Sydney, Canberra and Melbourne, have all been impacted with record days of air pollution, where your way of life is under attack. You can't go out for a run, going to the beach, going to work. We've had the CBD in Sydney where smoke alarms going off in big business because of the air pollution. So this absolutely grinds your business and your economy to a halt. It's had a huge impact on our tourism. We just have to take the politics out of it, especially the party politics, and get on with the plan.
So it sounds absolutely wonderful. And again, I can only imagine, there were so many kids with respiratory illness in New York City after 9/11, and a lot of that became clear only a decade after that catastrophe. And it was directly due to the particulate in the air. So I'm sure you as a parent live every day with anxiety about how the appalling air pollution and the catastrophic natural environment around children, around the elderly, around everyone is affecting people. So I really applaud that. But again, to go right to the meat of the bill, I read your website description of it very carefully, and there are a lot of things to cheer. And again, we try really hard to be totally neutral. What is very exciting is, in a time of sound bites, as you rightly point out, is that you clearly set a target of net zero by 2050. Is that correct?
Yes. And I'm very big on following the science. So a big component of the bill is the establishment of a Climate Change Commission, which is an expert-based panel that will be advising and making recommendations to government. And of course that means that there is flexibility. So I know that there will be some who say it needs to be more dramatic and drastic than net zero by 2050, but that I think is up to the science, and it has to be established by the Commission. And so there is scope for that to be recommendations, and there is flexibility, just as there is flexibility in the UK Act. So the UK Act started at 8% reductions by 2050, and last year they passed to make it net zero by 2050. So that's the whole point of framework legislation, is to make sure we have a long-term goal and a process of adapting to our changing circumstances.
So I do understand. So I've read a lot of legislation aimed at getting to managing emissions and stabilizing the environment, notably California's, and of course these are different, countries, different systems, of course. But one thing that I've noticed a lot of good legislation does is have kind of granular, how are we going to do it, and also enforcement mechanisms. And I've also been reading a lot of Australian rules and regulations and government guidelines. And I don't mean to be rude, but what's really striking, what's upsetting a lot of Australians, is it does seem like the teeth are out of a lot of standard enforcement documents in Australia. People don't feel like there's accountability. So far as I've read your goals and your guidelines, they're absolutely wonderful, first step. But a lot of people want to know if there's a commission and they're advising the government and it's a target, by what mechanism are you going to get there? Like, I didn't see any granular investment in solar or training in renewables. Maybe that's in the details that are to come. And I also didn't see, and maybe it's just not there yet, or not public yet, what enforcement mechanisms you're going to use. So I wonder if you would speak to that. Because I'm sure.
Well, the difficulty, I think the problem is that that's actually where we've gone wrong in Australia. So where the debate has gone stuck is because it gets prescriptive, and so you have a change of government with a change of party politics, and so basically my predecessor, Mr. Abbott, when he was Prime Minister, he basically repealed all the legislation, or the effective legislation we had in place in terms of reducing our emissions, and we were left with really a shell and nothing very effective. So I feel that we need unfortunately, Australia needs the baby steps. Australia is so divided on this issue. We need to come in with the framework that then allows governments and the various parties to have their various approaches, but with an ultimate accountability in terms of getting to the ultimate goal, and that is broken back down into the 5-year carbon emission budget periods. And
so explain what that means. That was really, sorry to speak over you. Please explain what that means, because that was another real concrete proposal that I'd love for people to understand. What are those 5-year budgets, and why are they an important step in the right direction in your view?
Well, the guiding principles which will apply to how the Minister applies and the Commission applies powers under the Act is that we need generational equity, and fiscal responsibility. You can't simply leave this problem to the 2040s. Continue on a slow reduction rate, and then hope to basically ramp it up for the last 10 years when the problem becomes severe, because we all know that is going to be at an extremely high cost. So fiscal responsibility means we have to do it gradually. So 5-year carbon emission budget periods means that we set what is our realistic emission reduction path to get to the net zero by 2050, so that you have flexibility, and certain sectors will get there much faster than others. So we have to be realistic that agriculture, for example, will not be able to reduce emissions at the same pace that, for example, transport can, or our energy sector can, because we're making such progress in renewables. But by having transparency and accountability across all sectors, the Commission can recommend to government, and government must then put in place adaptation plans and emission plans that get to those numbers that we need to be at the end of each 5-year carbon period or budgeting period. So there is, because at the moment in Australia, the rhetoric we have from the government is, don't you worry, we'll get to 26 to 28% in the canter by 2030. So putting aside the problem that that's not enough, and the science is saying that is not enough, there is no discussion of what happens post 2030, and there is the use of carryover credits, which essentially you're cheating to get to.
Can you explain to non-Australians what that is, carryover credits?
Well, because we had a commitment under the Kyoto Protocol, the current government, whilst having committed to the Paris Agreement and made a commitment to 26 to 28% reductions of emissions by 2030 on 2005 levels, it is doing so by taking into account that it overachieved on the Kyoto Protocol. So basically, not really reducing emissions. What it really comes down to is our emissions are still going up. So we're not really getting it. It's a budgeting trick. You're double counting. Right. It's cheating.
Yes. All right. Thank you for that. So going back to these, the meat of your bill. Will those 5-year budgets be voluntary, or do people really have to fit into it? Or Or is the mechanism, when you say baby steps, and I just want to say I respect that, right? Because, I've seen in every country, in every democracy, you've got the extremes on the left and the extremes on the right, and it's gridlock, right? So I do respect people who kind of wade there in a moderate position and try to say, look, let's just move things along and everybody will be a little unhappy, but we'll make progress. And that's really how I see, it's not just how I see the bill, it's what you're describing. Like, it's going to take movement from everyone to get this bill going. It doesn't give 100% to anyone, right? So those 5-year budgets, are they voluntary, or what is the mechanism by which they have to happen? What's going to keep Australia from 5 years from now, say you pass it in March, right? 5 years from now, people are saying, we didn't quite get there. We're in agriculture. We don't want to lose the money of cutting emissions. We're in, coal mining. We don't lose the money of cutting emissions. What's the mechanism there for enforcement?
Well, no, because there's that long-term commitment to the net zero, and the guiding principles are you have to do it in a fiscally responsible way. Not getting there in a budget period means that you are then no longer complying with the purpose of the act and that long-term goal. You simply won't get there. So it's building that accountability along the way. Sadly, we have very short terms of government. We have elections every 3 years. So a government will be very much under scrutiny for its 5-year budget period. And so we have, for example, from our economy, we have the Reserve Bank, which sets our interest rates. And so it's a very important independent tool that sets how we're tracking. And this will have that same effect where there is that direct accountability. It's a requirement to be publicly reporting to Parliament and to the public on a yearly basis.
Gotcha.
And plans ahead. So because so much of our government has been reactive, and you can see that with our bushfire crisis at the moment, there is no long-term plan in place. And by the time you get to the next election, it's barely at that point of, let me look at this problem, and in about 6 months I'll come out with a royal commission or a report, and we just never get to that planning phase. So what this puts in place is that it will be mapped out and planned well in advance, so it can be delivered.
Gotcha. So really it's accurate to call it a framework. You're trying to create an institutional, it's like a Paris Agreement for Australia, right? An institutional set of commitments that people can't just kick down the road, trusting that the next election will take care of it or that they won't be accountable if they're not in power 5 or 10 years down the road. Well, that's pretty creative, I have to say. Do you want to speak to the fact that there isn't actual funding commitments in the summary that I've seen so far? Do you expect to have any investment? Like, I know someone just sent me a news article, which I can't believe is true, but it seems to be, of $90 billion invested in submarines in Australia. God bless you if you've got that kind of money. But, a lot of people watching this will be saying, well, what kind of investment in changing our infrastructure to renewables is there going to be? How are we going to pay for it?
Well, the difficulty as a part of the members bill, it can't touch on supply and the financial aspects. So again, I need to stay within the framework of what I can do as a private member, presenting a private members bill. But what it does have in those guiding principles, which are prescriptive on the minister and the commission, is in that aspect of fiscal responsibility, it's looking at all the sectors. So if we look at health, what are the increased costs that we are going, how exposed is our health sector to risk climate change impacts? What risk assessment needs to be made, and what budgetary consideration needs to go into the adaptation plan? So whilst not being specific on from a budgeting point of view, also investment, again, because it's all linked. You have a risk assessment over each sector with then recommendation as to plans to adapt. Government has to put in place and respond to that planning requirement, and then there is an assessment of how efficient and how are those government plans working? Are they delivering or not? And do they need to be changed? So it is that accountability, I think, that is important to make sure we stay on track and all sectors are addressed. Because we have areas of Australia where, even though they might not be not climate change deniers, but not so compelled with the climate change argument, but they are in a very real way experiencing the impact. So our agriculture is at a real crossroads. They are faced with record drought, record issues, and they are calling out for a plan. So we keep passing in Parliament sort of emergency relief funds where the government is coming up with funding to sort of bail people out.
Right.
But the reality is the problem of climate change is not going away. The impacts are not going away. The cost of those impacts is going to grow exponentially. We already know our power prices are going to go up as a result of the bushfires because of all the wires that are deep down. We know our insurance premiums are going to go up. We have whole areas that may not be insurable. We know the cost of our fresh produce, fruit and vegetables, meat is going to go up as a result. We know customer confidence is down. This has a really wide-reaching impact on Australia. So in terms of addressing that, and I think that's why so many people in the population are just so anxious to know that we have a plan, and there is nothing coming from the government that is reassuring that there is any kind of long-term plan. I mean, this is a government who don't even acknowledge the scale of the risk ahead. They don't even recognise that it's a problem. So how can we possibly be prepared for the challenge if we don't acknowledge it's a problem?
I mean, Ms. Steggall, you've really touched on one of the most kind of head-splitting aspects of watching this from afar, which is you're up against a hermeneutical problem. If people don't want to say climate change exists or that the science is real, it is pretty radical just to get everyone to agree we have a climate change problem, right? There's a pretty important baby step there. Last question before, and I'm sorry to get super nerdy, but I've noticed that people who care about their bills actually like getting super nerdy, so I'm sure you don't mind. We looked into FOIA law in Australia, and I have to say it's one of the least impressive, no disrespect, really, I love Australia. It's not a great FOIA situation. There's a lot of carve-outs to not release documents if they have things like commercial value, which really I've never seen before in a working democracy, no disrespect. So having said that, how can we be sure that the wonderful documents that your climate change framework will be producing will be made available unredacted to the citizens of Australia and really the world? Because again, no disrespect, but the Australian catastrophe, we're all connected, is affecting everyone, just like fires in Northern California or volcanoes in the Philippines are affecting everyone.
Yeah. So the bill is prescriptive in terms of the duties and responsibilities of the Commission. The Commission does report back to Parliament and publish its reports and findings on how we're tracking and what's happening. And same from the government's point of view, it must report back to Parliament, and that is on the public record. So that is part of it, is that raising that level of accountability. At the moment, even as a Member of Parliament, it has been difficult to piece together the ways in which the current government claims it's getting to the outcome or what it's doing on its emission reduction.
I do understand. I know that there has been material provided to the Parliament that hasn't necessarily made it into the hands of citizens unredacted. So just saying, as a journalist, as a friend of Australia, I hope that as you go along, you might consider language to make sure that those documents get unredacted onto Parliament's website or into the hands of voters. I know that you're very accountable to your constituents. I know you seem to feel like transparency is very important. I know that honesty in government is an important part of your platform. Is that correct? Am I getting
Absolutely. I mean, look, with fellow members of the crossbench here in Australia, we are very much pushing for a National Integrity Commission. It's something that's missing in our Australian framework. Perception of corruption is maybe not high in Australia compared to maybe other countries, but we have had a number of scandals and issues locally that have really raised that issue that we need accountability. We can't have MPs, their staff and lobbyists or industry groups above the law beyond scrutiny. There needs to be transparency and accountability. So we are pushing very hard for a National Integrity Commission to have those kind of powers, to have a public referral pathway so people can refer an issue and it can be properly investigated. That's very topical at the moment in Australian politics, sadly. But that is an aspect that we need to improve. We have, I think, like a few countries around the world, that shift to a more conservative approach with concerns in relation to freedom of the press, freedom of information. I mean, we had very concerning raids on journalists just after the election. I would say, cynically, I think it was rather calculated that it was just after the election and not before the election. I've certainly spoken out against that. I see a free press a vital part of democracy, especially with our national broadcaster in Australia. So I am absolutely, integrity for me and accountability is vitally important, which is why for me it's important to be an independent, because I am directly accountable to my electorate.
Well, I know that a lot of people we hear from at Daily Cloud are going to be really excited about an integrity commissioner, are going to want to support that coming about. Do you have time now to take some direct questions from constituents that I would read? They can't exactly call in, but they sent these to us. A couple of people, David Baggs said, given this government has shown such an egregious negligence around the climate emergency and bushfire safety planning, is unable to tell the truth on nearly any matter it deals with, still supports the development of new coal and fossil fuel mining, and is unwilling to take any meaningful climate action moving forward, will you publicly rescind your commitment to support the government? I don't know if that's a question that
well, again, I think that there's a little misinformation going around on social media on this. I see this a bit in the commentary of put a vote of no confidence or pull your support. The reality is, in Australia, Westminster system, we have a lower house. In the lower house, the current coalition government has a majority of 2. So they have power. This is not me giving them power. I don't have the ability to withdraw supply or confidence. So I wish I had that power, but I don't. So I think there's a misunderstanding there. When it comes to legislation, as an independent, my role is not to be Labor. I am not, yes, I guess I'm not in government, so I'm technically in the opposition, but from the crossbench as an independent, my role is to work with both sides of the political spectrum and to look at legislation on its merits. If it's put forward by the government, I have a process of looking at legislation in how it will impact my electorate. How is it good law? Is it ethical? Has it been broadly consultative in relation to relevant professional bodies? What feedback have I had from my electorate on that legislation? And then it's my job, my duty to represent the electorate. So I do have to weigh that up in relation to all legislation. So of course, some people on social media, because they are maybe aligned with me when it comes to wanting more action on climate change, but don't agree with maybe my fiscal approach or my views in relation.
Okay, so we had a little bit of a glitch.
And I have a clear process about that.
So jumping in, we had a little glitch there, but it's coming through again. I'm really, really glad you explained that, Member of Parliament Steggall, because
Zali's fine.
Thank you. Because a lot of, social media, it's wonderful in so many ways, but it can quickly, and we know there's a lot of intervention in social media, distort, especially a real trailblazer's intentions or the facts. So I'm glad we're here to give you a platform to correct the record, and you just did, and you set people straight on that. And also I'm very excited that you're explaining in granular detail, especially to young people who don't always know how your system works. It's a different system than, every democracy is a little bit different. It's so important for people to understand these rules that you just explained. And a lot of people, by the way, 4 or 5 of these questions, I'm not going to read them all, but Diana, Peter Galvin, David Baggs, and 4 or 5 people have asked the same question. So you answered that. That's great. Artemis Arcady asks, could you join the Greens? And I think you just kind of answered that question, right? You don't have to join the Greens to get something
My difficulty with the Greens is, yes, they have, I guess, an environmentalist platform, but they also have a social, a more extreme socialist platform, which I don't agree with aspects of that. So again, I think, and they are caught up in their own party politics at times as well. So no, when I was sort of electing to leave my profession, my professional career as a barrister to run, I felt strongly about being an independent.
Right. I'm really glad this is coming up because I think there's so much polarization on social media and just focus in the media on the cat fight and the horse race, to mix metaphors. People really need to hear from people like you that actually negotiating with your colleagues, even if you don't agree on everything, can be much more productive than, signing on to a whole agenda. Do you want to speak to that, or do you feel like you've said what you want to say about that?
Look, my background in law, sports law and commercial law, but family law as well. Now, family law, people come at it with very polarised views of a situation.
Oh, yes.
And a key part of it, in Australia anyway, is that you have to go through mediation,
right,
or conciliation conferences. And so clearly out of that process, you don't all walk away with everything you started with, but you have to find that middle ground that you can live with. You have to find that working relation to get an outcome. So I'm a lot more focused on what are the things we have in common, what are the things we can agree on, and let's see where we can negotiate and move the bar. I just don't think it gets us anywhere as a society, as a parliament, where if it's a stick to my views and it's my way or the highway, then people of that bent, and sometimes it is disagrees, tends to be just as destructive as the extreme conservatives and deniers, because it's that hardline idea that it's my way or I'll wreck the place, and that hasn't gotten us anywhere. So for me, I am what I would say a sensible centre of looking at things and trying to find solutions. My campaign was all about being very positive. And maybe that's my background as an athlete, having been to Olympics and competed at a high level. You learn very early on in sport that you can't change an outcome. You can't change a result. You have to learn from it. You have to analyse your performance, but you have to learn to let it go and face the future and focus on your next goal, because if not, you'll be eaten up and you just won't achieve. So I am very focused on, I'm not interested on who's to blame on how we got here. The finger pointing and the blame doesn't get us anywhere. We need to look at what are our solutions moving forward.
Well, to chime in on that, I have to say, reading bills every week, what I have found categorically is that the best legislation is bipartisan. I mean, the most creative legislation is bipartisan, because people are stretching, they're thinking outside the box, they're bringing new ideas to the table. So I know that, the media doesn't usually shine a light on the sensible, moderate position, but it's very important for us to really understand that the best way forward is often for people who really don't like each other all the way or every single thing about the other's platform to sit down and hammer out some solutions. All right, asks if Australia goes to zero carbon emissions, how will that affect the world's temperature? That's a good question.
Well, I don't have a magic wand to say it will change things straight away, but what we do have is a lot of scientists, and we have the IPCC telling us that on our current emissions, we are on track to a 3 to 4 degree warming world, and that is going to be catastrophic. So we have to act, and we have to do it as quickly and as constructively as possible. So unfortunately, we have certain impacts that are locked in. So even passing this bill this year, putting things into place, we are going to have certain impacts, and that's why the bill is so focused on risk assessment and adaptation plans, because we need to be prepared for what we are going to be facing in the next 10 years. But if we take action now in reducing our emissions and put ourselves on the right trajectory, we can limit global warming, hopefully to 1.5, or at least to stay under 2 degrees. If we don't, again, it really is. I think it's absolutely negligent on the part of this generation, and it's an intergenerational debt that is unacceptable.
I think that's a great answer, and I would also say, as a member of the rest of the world, that since your smoke has already reached South America, it's, whatever you do to stay under 1.5% is going to help us. And the same thing, I speak as a member of one of the biggest emitters, if not the biggest emitters of carbon emissions, the United States. So Lee Wall says, I think this is going back to the other questions I think you answered, but if you would endorse or support a motion of no confidence in our current government. Do you want to address that, or do you feel like you already answered it?
Again, look, the no confidence, I think it's about being productive. There's clearly, I think we are going to have quite eventful first week of Parliament in February when we go back. We've had corruption scandals, we've had sports rorts, we've got clearly an inefficient response to the bushfires, we were unprepared. There's been a lot of criticism, so it's going to be quite lively, I suspect. Again, the motion of no confidence, it would require 3 coalition members to cross the floor to be effective. So it can be done from a point of view of grandstanding, but I don't see that as being particularly effective.
So interesting. Countries are, I'm sorry.
It's one of those things that if it was a minority government, then it would be a whole different story. But at the moment, it is a majority government.
Very interesting. I mean, we're really having very parallel moments, my country and yours right now. Like, do we plow ahead and drag ourselves out of the mire, or do we have a dramatic rift? So I think you really answered that. Mick Martin says, why is Australia so divided on climate change? Is there an Australian version of the Koch brothers? Does speaking up on climate science impact campaign donations? 3 really interesting questions.
I would tend to agree. I would say our Minerals Council and mining lobby has been effective in Australia the way the gun lobby is in America, in terms of donations to the major parties and influencing conservative politics. It has been very divisive, and there's been a lot of misinformation. And look, I think also Murdoch and News Limited have played a huge part. We are a country that has a lot of that media. It plays a big part, and it has influenced a lot of understanding, and it has misinformed a lot of people. And then you have people like my predecessor who he was a very aggressive opposition leader when Labor was in government, and he really changed the tone of politics in Australia. There had been a much better working relationship between government and opposition until then, and he was a real start, and we've seen it for the last 10 years, a very, I think, very sort of divisive and dysfunctional kind of politics, very focused on being trashing the place, wreck the joint. It's all about being very negative. And he made it a campaign issue. And ironically, since leaving politics, his main advisor has recognised and admitted that this was purely a calculated political move to position and to characterise certain legislation in a certain way to frighten people, and to ensure that there would be a change of government and a vote. So, again, that's where I really am dissatisfied with party politics, where people are focused on their personal gain, their own agenda inside the party, instead of what democracy is supposed to be about, which is representing the people that vote for you. So it's interesting. As a barrister, you represent your client to the court, and you have a certain duty. As a Member of Parliament, you are elected by your constituents, and I see often party politics as a bit of a conflict of interest in how does that sit with your duty to your constituents, and that's a real question. So around the bill, the big part of our campaign is actually pushing for a conscience vote. So in the Australian Parliament, a conscience vote is asking members of a party to push to have a free vote, that they can, that this is an issue that goes above party politics. This is an issue of conscience, and I believe climate is an issue of conscience. And individual MPs should be free to have a vote that represents their constituents.
Fantastic. So, Renegade Aussie just asked, do you support the boycott of News Limited?
Well, News Limited don't particularly like me, so that's not can't.
So, okay, well, that's good enough. So here's a good one. Denise Shrevell asks, some in the Twitter community are critical of Zali as she gives supply to the government, and some see her as lib-light. Can she please address these issues in your interview, as we'll need Twitter's support for the Climate Act Now bill she's launching? I think the Twitter crew will appreciate her honesty and authenticity in addressing these issues. Her bill is the most tangible and positive initiative I've seen addressing climate change, and will give Australians something positive to get behind, which we desperately need. And I just want to note, this is a convener of hashtag #AusPol. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So This is a convener who has a lot of voice. So I'm excited that you're getting that question. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. This is, again, going back to that idea of supply. So the government has a majority. I can't prevent them from passing legislation and forming government. The question of support, again, I represent my electorate. This is an electorate that has for 25 years voted Liberal and so coalition. So the majority here are fiscally conservative, and I am part of that. I would say I am a centrist in that I am fiscally conservative. I am but as for competition, I'm for small government and really looking at more competition. But I'm also, I would say, socially progressive in looking at, I want to see a kind of treatment for refugees. I think our policies have really been very divisive on that front as well. And I want to see action on climate change. And ironically, I see better action on climate as completely consistent with more sensible, liberal values, in the sense of it's an intergenerational debt that we are leaving if we continue emissions at the rate they're at. So it's a really interesting question that keeps coming up, and I guess my response to everyone is be informed to be effective. So there's no point on continually tweeting about withdraw supply, withdraw confidence, because it's just simply not a factual thing that it's possible. Where it probably comes from is, if it were to be a minority government, during an election campaign, I got asked, who would I favour forming government? Now, if it's a minority government, it means they don't have the numbers on their own to form government, and they have to form or negotiate. And I make it very clear at all times that, yes, I would represent my electorate in terms of they are more prone to favour more prone to favour a Liberal and a coalition government, but only on the basis of effective climate policy. So, and you have to remember, at the last election, Labor brought very divisive fiscal policy to the table.
Right.
Well, that had no support in the electorate and was very divisive, and I absolutely didn't agree with. So, again, everyone tends to want to be so black and white. It's just, it's not, there's a lot of elements to it. But for, all the keyboard warriors on Twitter, I think it's really important to be informed and factual rather than sort of divisive, because if it's not, you're as divisive and harming as the deniers, because you're really getting in the way of the right debate.
Right. So I keep hearing you say something that's really interesting and kind of revolutionary, and I'm excited to hear you communicate directly to Denise about this and to all the people she works with her hashtag on Twitter. I think you're basically, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what you're encouraging people to do is evolve past labels and be willing to come together around a big goal in strategic ways, even if we don't all agree down the line in straight ideological ways. Is that a fair thing to say?
Absolutely. And I've tried to be very clear about that of course, every time I vote in Parliament, I'm not going to please everyone. Right. But I at least try to be transparent about how I got to the decision, what process I followed. Yeah. That there is I'm diligent and rigorous in that assessment process and consulting with my electorate, looking at the issues and really looking at the merits of each legislation, so that even though we can, I think, and most people that are reasonable recognise that we're not all going to agree on everything, but we can respect one another for our differences if we know that we've reached that decision on a firm basis, that it's properly founded. It's a really important aspect. And I think that's the strength of independence. We're not bound by party doctrine. We are, in fact, bound by, I think, it's a more question of integrity, inclusion, and how, processes as opposed to overall doctrine.
You're giving me some really interesting thoughts, which is, I think people get so ideological and preoccupied with labels because they feel so excluded from the process, and they're not at the table when legislation is drafted. So the only time they get to have their voices reflected is during elections. And I think the more we offer opportunities like this, and I'm so glad you're doing it, and things like Bill Cam, which I'm proud of, that let people be granular with tweaking legislation, the less people will feel the need to never come together, because they'll see, I can get together with Zali on climate change, I can oppose her on, I don't know what, fiscal policy in other ways, and this is how we do politics, and we're all doing politics together. And politics is a conversation, ideally, where we can agree and disagree. And, what issue is more demanding bipartisan and transpartisan support than climate bills, I would say. So,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's the point of a House of Representatives is to represent the myriads of views that we have in the population. If we all agreed on everything, it would be boring, and you would have no need for government. The whole reality is our population, society has a lot of views. There are a lot of extremes, and there's a lot of diversity. But I think we're all the better from that diversity, and we actually need to, we need to respect it, and we need to make sure it's part of the conversation. So just because I disagree with somebody on something doesn't mean I don't respect it, and I want to understand. And I do find generally we have more in common than we have that sets us apart. So there is generally a lot more we can work with. And trying to understand where people are coming from. What is it that's influencing their views? Why is their position so different to mine on this issue?
Right.
Because once you can start to understand that, you can actually start finding the solutions.
Absolutely. I think it is huge that you've sat down and been willing to answer constituents yourself. And I think that's a big achievement, honestly, in letting people feel like they're going to get their voices heard. They're going to be able to affect legislation. Maybe the next draft will be a little bit different, depending on what you hear from your constituents today and from the people of Australia. Do you have time for one or two more questions? People are really eager.
Sure. And I should say part of the bill is there will be public consultation. So the Commission will need to put its plans and reports to public consultation and take that into account, and so will the Minister. So there is that element of public consultation. So industry groups and people impacted or areas can have a voice and be part of the process.
I mean, I think that's wonderful, but having tried to get some answers from one of or two of your government offices, I think that actually sitting down as you're doing and answering your constituents directly is even more impressive. Let's put it that way. All right, Julie asks, ask Zali if she would do more than just introduce a symbolic bill. The LNP government will not support any realistic measures to decarbonize Australia's economy and cut our CO2 emissions. Labor and the CB can't pass bills without 2 or 3 defectors from the LNP coalition.
Well, exactly. What we need is a people campaign. Again, I am only one voice, but I think with many voices we can make a difference. So I am, I guess, the tool by which, as a Member of Parliament, I am able to present the legislation to Parliament, put it forward as a private minister's bill. But I certainly can't do this on my own. I need the people of Australia to get behind it. I need people in every one of their electorates to go and pressure and lobby and urge their local representative, their MP, to push for a conscience vote, because at what point do they say that their party room politics and the ambitions and the internal rivalries are more important than the future of their electorate and the voice of their electorate? So in terms of this is not just symbolic. This is generally, we either wait 3 years for another election where both parties will have to come forward with some new policies, and we see things deteriorate, and we still don't have the right kind of risk assessment plans and adaptation plans that we need to have in place. I mean, if there's anything that's been shown that is absolutely needed and vitally important at the moment for Australia is we need that proper risk assessment and adaptation plans. Our communities are not safe. We need to protect our communities by having proper plans in place. That has to be a number one duty of Parliament and of government. So that is a key part of what has to happen. But people need to know. So what happens a lot with politics, I think, and I'm new to politics, so I still see myself as a little bit from the outside as a professional, is I think politicians tend to think they're in a bubble. And I know our Prime Minister has often talked about there being a bubble around Canberra and around our Parliament. The reality is, and so as a result, the politicians tend to think the rest of the public and the Australian people or the people around them are not watching, are not following what's happening. So one of the key parts of the campaign around the climate change bill is going to be that there is a public awareness that this solution is on the table and you are going to be held to account. So you cannot turn up at the next election and say, well, I am a moderate and I believe in climate change action and I'm doing what I can from within my party. If you haven't stood up and demanded to have a conscience vote, then there will be people in your electorate and all around Australia will know that you have failed to really stand up. And so the question then becomes, what good are you? What is the good of having people from parties in certain electorates if they are incapable of changing the direction of the party policies? So it comes back to the efficiencies of democracy and who do you want to represent you. So if the Australian people are happy with where things are, that will be the outcome. If they are, as I genuinely believe, really now confronted with the reality of climate change and want to be reassured, they want to know that there is a long-term plan, that we know where we're heading, we're properly prepared, then they will demand this of their representatives.
Well, this is a fantastic note to start wrapping up on. You've been so generous. Let's get to the really granular. Say there are, we've had so many questions. There are more questions coming. I will save them. I'll forward them to your wonderful associate. In a very concrete way, you've said if people want to support you and help you and get behind this People's Campaign for your climate bill, which again is you're introducing in March, correct? That's when the action is on this bill. All right. So what can people watching really concretely do, like step by step, every day between now and March to make this happen if they want to? And let me just alert you to the fact that I asked my listeners or viewers on Twitter in Australia how they got in touch with their Member of Parliament. And a shocking number of them, again, no disrespect to Australia, one of my favorite countries in the world, a shocking number said, I reached out to my MP, I don't hear from them. I don't even get a form letter. They've blocked me on Twitter when I politely disagreed with them. They've blocked me, like government officials were blocking people on Twitter, not for threats of violence, not for rude comments, but for literally disagreeing with them or saying things like, what about the refugees? So I don't think people have had a lot of people have not had a good experience calling their elected official. They don't know that their opinion is being registered. They're being blocked on Twitter, so they can't tweet them. How concretely, given this, can people know that what to do to make their voice be heard for your campaign and to amplify their voices, really?
Well, we will, I guess, going to my website or following this online, there will be those steps available. There will be a website to really go to know how to make a difference in that way. But I can talk to other members of Parliament. They do know that you are writing to them. They do know that message is getting through, even if they are not acknowledging it. So don't be disheartened because they are not responding to you. Write to your local newspaper, call into your local radio station, talk to your 5 neighbours, have your whole street talk about it. Write on behalf of whole community groups. If you're in a tennis club, if you're in a golf club, have
Samantha
those
Badham's,
conversations, because
sorry.
absolutely, once it is talked about publicly and it is real, it's outside sometimes of the bubble of social media, but you have it in the real world. Talk about it at your coffee shop, talk about it at the restaurants, and having people ask to have meetings. Members of Parliament have limited amounts of staff, so it is a big task for them if they are absolutely inundated with those messages. I can assure you that when they are getting a lot of communications and requests for meetings, they are paying attention to it and reporting it back. And of course, the media will pay attention to it. So things like having ad frames on your social media about supporting that there be a climate act, making sure that it is absolutely demanding it on Twitter and other forms of social media. We saw with the bushfires, I mean, we've had a very reactive response from the government. So basically it was on social media that the Australian people were really demanding a bigger and better reaction and response from the Australian government. And it is only when that level of outrage was loud that we got a change of position. You know, the Australian Defence Forces were called in, and there was much better response. For example, payments to volunteer firefighters, much better aid and recovery relief to communities that are impacted. So you do see a response when there is public pressure, and I can assure you, members of Parliament care about the votes that they will get at the next election. Okay,
well, that's very inspiring and reassuring. Can I ask a favor on behalf of all the people who have sent me their eye-opening non-responses or being blocked on Twitter from their electeds? Maybe could you, on behalf of them, ask your colleagues to please unblock their constituents who are trying to communicate courteously with them? The other thing I want to offer is that it does seem like elected officials and democracies really need good digital tools, and we'll try to produce them, where people can register as constituents in favor of or opposing a position and get that to you en masse, because it is overwhelming to tabulate all of those opinions and respond personally, especially if you're understaffed. So we'll give that some thought so that, so that we can help you help the citizens better as well. But so what you're saying is don't give up, contact your elected representative, get active on social media. And the last thing I really want to say to all of you is it is really true if you take like a document and get every one of the 50 moms in your moms group or your book club to sign it in support of this bill, or we're nonpartisan, so opposing this bill. And isn't it helpful if you say where you're a constituent and if you give your full name? Isn't that useful?
Especially what electorate you're in, and what your voting pattern might be, because I can assure you that this is influencing you to change your vote. That is something that will be very focused on.
You have to say it, absolutely. Absolutely, I can't stress this enough. You say, when you get this document together, and petitions aren't really that effective, I just want to say, but this document that you then send to your MP, of constituents, if you have them say, I'm going to vote on this issue, on Zali's, climate change bill or whatever it is, that really, really makes a difference. Give your full name and also vote. I don't know about your system, but in America, if you vote in congressional elections, if you vote in off years, they know you vote, and that gives you superpowers as a voter. So always don't just vote in the big elections. Vote every time. Vote all the time, and vote by post if you're out of the country. Isn't that correct? It gives you more of a voice.
Australia is a little different. We have compulsory voting, you have to buy your vote in Australia. So there is a high level of engagement as a result. And look, I think what happens with independents are an interesting development of democracy, I think, for Australia and maybe other countries, where people really have a choice of someone that is more accountable to them. And it's so the major parties are, this is a challenge for them. How do they have a sort of, a broad base of trying to be everything to everyone, but still be true to sort of values and certain policy aspects? So I think in a lot of areas you can find independents who are local, who understand the issues, who are very committed to their area to represent their voice. And that is a real threat to the party machine. So they actually have to come up with a way of being more true to that. And I think that requires allowing more free votes.
That's really interesting.
Which is a really important part of it.
It's a really interesting, important insight. So there's a lot of hope and a lot of change that's possible, even though it seems like a very, very dark moment for Australia. So I know on behalf of many people watching, Zali, Steggall, I want to thank you so much for your generosity in giving us this lovely chunk of time and for being so responsive to not only your constituents, but the people of Australia in this very, very difficult moment where they're looking for hope. Everyone at Zali Steggall, you can go to her website, follow her on Twitter, and it's the Climate Bill Framework 2020. And Zali, any last words before we sign off for today?
Well, I have to say thank you to the international community. I mean, we've had an amazing response here locally in terms of our community really coming together and that Australian spirit in times of crisis. But what has been just unbelievable and just so reassuring has been how much support we've received from the rest of the world. You know, we are united. This is a global response. We are at the forefront of the crisis at the moment with what's happening, but everybody, I mean, the amount of donations and assistance that's coming has been unbelievable. So when sort of people say, well, we're only a small proportion of what's the rest of the world doing, well, in our time of need, the rest of the world has certainly stepped up and pitched in to help us. And so the least we can do is actually play a part on this global issue and be a leader and come to the party with proper framework and proper legislation. So thank you for your amplifying this aspect and trying to look for solutions. We need more of these discussions to really get people moving forward.
We will be following your leadership with great interest, and anytime you want to come back on, I know you've got hundreds and thousands of people who want to see you. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Be well. Thank you so much. Zali Steggall.